Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your Critique of the Week. It is Friday, May 23rd. Thanks so much for joining me. Before we get in, I should say, welcome in. That's all I've got to say. Let's see, Terry Miller is here. Hey, Terry. Let's see who else we got. Winston Munn, CLAS, Dr. Q's here, Steve Horrell, Lynn Schilling, Jamie Thomas is here, Rose Lennard, good evening from England. Maria L. Burgess here, Paul Buckner, good to see you. Tara Meslick McMahon, CC Baran is here, Mary Lisa D. Diminishes, Patty Arbor, Jamal Uden, Melody Bonilla is here, Danette Bermia, Mark Grinier, Nancy Sabanik, Katie Dozier, upstairs today, hanging out with Lizzie. Let's see, Dick Westheimer's here. Hey, Dick. Jimmy Pappas. Hammett Malik, Tom Barlow, Chelsea McClellan. So great group of people on hand. Sharon Ferrante, good to see you. Linda Smith, Dee Coleman, if we haven't said that yet. Christina Newven, Cliff Miller. Yeah, Rachel Grieve is here. Good. Rachel's one of the ones we're going to go over first. So as always, the point is to give that workshop experience. And we go through, if you'd like to submit your poems for critique, all you got to do is go to Rattle.com, find up in the contents the Critique of the Week button. Go there, click on that, submit 2 poems, and you'll get into the queue. We go in the order they were received, unless you are a regular participant. If I recognize your name, we'll get to you earlier. Unfortunately, Rachel's sort of, more participating more and more lately. But she had one back from February. So we're going to start with Rachel Grieve first. But if you're a regular participant, we'll get to you first or sooner, and then you won't have to wait as long. Right now, all the poems in the regular submissions are from around December and January, going back that far. But if you participate, we get to you first because that's, you benefit the most, but you help everybody else out too, and that's what we're all trying to do. All right, well, let's take a look at the first poem. And as always, leave as many comments as you can. Any suggestions for, line breaks, diction, structure, where you get lost, what's working, what doesn't, all that good stuff that can help the poet out by hearing what strangers think when they read their poems, which is really the main thing. It's really hard to get a handle on what people think as they read your poems. There's so much of the context is there in your head, but doesn't get across, and there's things that are confusing. There are things that are really effective, and what we want to do is highlight what's really working and what's not. And then that's the way we get to be better poets and better communicators, really. Now let's take a look at what Rachel sent in. Again, Rachel's from Wisconsin, and these were from mid-February. And there's a general questions area. You can put in general questions, and Rachel said this. For Ice Poem, which was probably the first one, it says, along with the general critique, this is looking for a better title. So keep in mind in the title. And then for Sonnet, a bit of explanation on the second item, which is an experiment that's trying to do a lot with a little. I'm wondering if any of it lands or if it's a total stinker. Well, it's a really great way to send poems, actually. If you send your best poems, then that's something that happens in creative writing workshops all the time. You want to impress the teacher by sending your best, but really you want to send where you can learn the most from. And so having stuff that you're, pushing your own boundaries. Like last week we saw that with some of the submissions, and so if you're pushing your boundaries, seeing what works, that really is what helps. So it's good to do that. So thanks for doing that, Rachel. She says, too, the longer I sat with this, the more an entire relationship of 2 similar but very different people emerged, complete with magic, a love story, tension, violence, and the possibility of reconciliation. This was incredibly fun to write because of the way a rich story unfolded in my mind so late in the writing process. But as great as this was for me, I can absolutely picture it coming across as nothing but a random collection of rhyming words. So just curious. And then a question, as the second poem is so short, any chance I can wait less than a year before submitting something else here? Yeah, well, we'll see. Let's see what we have here for Rachel. So the first one, interesting. It's a minimalist sonnet is the second one. And this first one is Monona, 2025. And I'm going to have to search for, what's Monona? Monona, Wisconsin is a place. Is there any more to Monona? Monona, it's probably Monona, Wisconsin. Okay, well, let's take a look at this poem. Yeah, and everyone's saying, congratulations to Chelsea. Today is her poem of the day. A lot of people really moved. It's a very moving poem. It's one of those ones, I think, Chelsea read it on the Rattlecast and the prompt lines. And we published it because it's such a wonderful poem. So, yeah, check that out if you don't at rattle.com. Also, I should say for everybody, and let me point this out too really quick. The, not that, hang on. where do we want to find? There we go. Yeah, so this, I should say too, this rattle button over here, we finally fixed. So I have to make a post about it, like on my own socials and stuff. So, but it works now. The problem was some glitch where it was resetting. Nobody could figure out why in the development team. And it turns out what happens if you clicked the little rattle icon. Let me go to a poem we haven't rattled yet. Let's go back here. So if you click this rattle button before anything loaded, then it would refresh to 0 and you would just record those clicks. So you get up to 10 clicks, but they were getting reset a lot and we couldn't figure out why. We finally fixed it. And so the rattle button will work. So it's Brent Goodman's map in this one. And see the rattle button. And if I hit refresh, it actually holds. And so now this will actually work, which is a very exciting time. But the problem is, see how it takes a little extra time to load? If you would have clicked right when it loaded, that's when the error took place. So we figured that out. So feel free to use it. But yeah, so Chelsea McClellan's poem, Sistina Sophia, is today's poem on rattle.com. Go over right now and give it a whole bunch of rattles. And the more rattles it gets, if you scroll all the way down on rattle.com, that's the new way we're logging which poems are the most popular. So we have this little most clicked over here, currently popular. So so check that out too. All right, so now we're going to go to this poem we were looking at. Again, Rachel Greaves. Sorry for the little sidetrack. Monona, 2025. Here, oops. There we go. Monona, 2025. It was a great year for ice, a cold year, Spartan and snowless, a year to look between your boots at the dark shadow of a swimming carp, to feel the gut-drop weightlessness of walking on water like a cold Jesus whose sea was infinitely still. It was the year to learn the trick of freezing solid, to master the absurd penguin walk of a marriage carried on as a cold war. It was the year the memories of carrying on ossified in a stratigraphy of bubbles, one after another, the unspeakable longings and losses and unrequited loves stacked below the surface. That was a year for ice, when the blades were sliding across something unbroken, when the sun was rising through the clenched diamond teeth of the pressure ridges. And if you lay with burning ear pressed to the ice, you could hear the laser blasts of something continually cracking that was blessedly not you. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, so this is Monona 2025. And I think, to me, I think the title, I think you were right, Rachel, that the title leaves a lot to be desired. It doesn't, it sets the poem in a certain place. Although, if you're not familiar with Wisconsin, like we said, we don't know what Monona is. Not being all caps too, it makes it confusing as to maybe it's like stands for something. So it's a little hard to even know what that is. Googling it, you see it's Monona, Wisconsin. But I think, a different title. So let's think about as we go through what a good title can be. And a lot of times, a title is an opportunity. You have to think about it like that. There are a lot of functions that a title can have. The title can, sort of evoke something not in the poem that's necessary to understand the poem, which maybe this is leaning toward because it's setting the place. We don't know exactly where it is otherwise. Or the title can be some kind of leap, like a cut in a haiku or a haibun, where there's something sort of the extended metaphor is revealed in the title, or some kind of leap in expectation, so it adds that whole layer of depth to the poem that's not there. Also, the title can draw your interest in, be something that makes the reader want to read. So those are the kind of things that you want to think about when making a title function and have some value. And so let's think of that as we go through the poem. Anyway, Monona 2025. One of the suggestions right off, where was it? I saw it at the corner of my eye. It was Tara Meslick McMahon said, make the first line the title and a lead-in title right to the next line. Great poem, yeah. So, so you could have the title be, it was a great year for ice. And then that would work as title. Then you start out a cold year, Spartan and snowless. I think that's a good suggestion. Linda Smith agrees. So there's some great lines in this poem. There's the one problem for me, just talking about from an overarching standpoint, is it sort of stays in the same sort of stance and position the whole time, if that makes sense. Like we're sort of have this reflective, introspective, like let's look back at this year tone of voice without any kind of movement from that position. And so because of that, the poem feels a little bit like it's too long for the sort of the place that it lives. If you know, and if we had a sense of like moving into a scene, we could sort of justify that, or some kind of transition in perspective. But we stay in one place, and I think the poem can work that way if it's a little shorter and we cut it out, cut it down to a shorter length. Or we can try to find ways to bring it out and expand it by changing perspectives. And one thing to really think of that's wonderful in poems is like if you are a filmmaker and you have the camera, and the camera can zoom in and really be close up, and it can zoom out and show the whole earth. That kind of thing where we move around, we show different people's perspectives, and that is sort of missing in here. It keeps sort of one position. And that makes the poem feel kind of static and flat in a way that isn't really justified by some of the great lines and great story that's going on here. So I think that's the layer to be added to this poem. And so we'll go through sort of line by line and talk about it more and think about those two things. Think about the title and think about how you can move around a little bit more and have it the poem have a little more life through that. Yeah. And Kimberly Gibson Tran says, or no, it's Maria Berg says, there's a lot to like in this poem, but I think some of the lines didn't add anything. The penguin walk of a marriage really drew me in. And that's a great example of the thing I was just talking about. I think that because it feels a little flat because it has that same stance the whole time. Okay. It was a great year for ice, a cold year, Spartan and snowless. Somebody asked Tim Bryan why Spartan is capitalized. I'm not sure, Spartans come from... it's a proper noun, but eventually, I think at this point, it's not capitalized. It's one of those things I would, Spartan should be capitalized. Well, wait, no, when referring to the city state. However, when it's used in adjective to describe qualities like the strict self-discipline or simplicity, it is often lowercase. Okay, so I guess it's maybe a choice. It was a cold year, Spartan and snowless. A year to look between your boots at the dark shadow of a swimming carp. I really like that. So great opening, really great details there. To feel the gut drop weightlessness of walking on water, like a cold Jesus whose sea was infinitely still. I think one of the things to note, a lot of times, this is a simile using like or as, and a lot of times it's better, more direct to use a straight metaphor. So of walking on water, a cold Jesus whose sea was infinitely still. Like, why not just go for the whole metaphor and not have the simile? But I really like the description there, especially, as somebody who I've growing up on the shores of Lake Ontario, I've walked out on ice and lakes and things and gone ice fishing. And it's, I don't know, it's a really interesting experience. And I think this describes it well. It was the year to learn the trick of freezing solid, to master the absurd penguin walk of a marriage carried on as a cold war. Okay, so now we have a transition here. We go from describing the scene and the setting, the ice, which is really well done, to moving into the marriage. And it was a year, but see how it has the same voice, has that same like throwback retrospective tone. Instead of saying like that year we did this and we did this and we did this, and you sort of move into a more direct sort of language. It's still sort of looking back over time, and that's one of the things that makes it feel a little bit flat in this section. Although the absurd penguin walk of a marriage is a nice line. So how do we could cut straighter in, and say that more directly, and I think it would have more power and cut out a lot of the detail here. So instead of it was a year to learn the trick of freezing solid, if you just said that year we learned the trick of freezing solid, so we learned, and using that sense of we, instead of like it was the year, like go right into that marriage, and then we can talk about the absurd penguin walk and describe that a little more directly, and then you get the power of it being more direct in that transition. It was the year the memories of carrying on ossified, and a stratigraphy of bubbles. That's a great phrase, stratigraphy of bubbles, one after another. The unspeakable longings and losses and requited loves stacked below the surface. So for this whole stanza, really, the stratigraphy of bubbles and the marriage, the penguin walk of a marriage, are the two details that are really strong and stand out. The rest is sort of lost in this voice that I've been talking about. And so, diving in, that year we did this. This is what the marriage looked like. Boom, boom, boom. Like, get through that quick, and that's going to have a lot more power. That was the year for ice, when the blades were sliding across something broken, when the sun was rising through the clenched diamond teeth of the pressure ridges. I like the clenched diamond teeth of the pressure ridges. That's a great description again. And if you lay with a burning ear pressed to the ice, you could hear the laser blasts. And this is a phrase, to me, it didn't feel right. I'm calling it laser blasts. There's a continual cracking sound that's great to describe, but comparing it to a laser blast, I don't know, it feels wrong to me. And so I think maybe a different metaphor there for the sound itself, of something continually cracking that was blessedly not you. And I like, nice turn at the end too. I really like the last line being, that this cracking, I like where it goes, so this cracking not being us. But I would like to see, I guess, in the middle of the poem, in a direct way, some of that marriage, what that penguin walk was like, and talk about it more directly instead of this, like, in this throwback way. And that's my general opinion. Let me look at some more comments that are going on YouTube and Facebook here. Or maybe there's no one. Let's see, is there anyone on Facebook? Let me refresh in case it just wasn't working. Yeah, there's some comments on Facebook. Okay. Kimberly Gibson Trent says, I want to cut the repeat of That Was a Year for Ice. To me, I think it's lost. I think it gets trapped in the phrasing of That Was a Year. And it's really my general comment. And so getting rid of the That Was the Year for Ice, I think completely agree. Dry Montito says, there's a weird sci-fi sounding sound ice can make. It is. It's yeah. But describing it as lasers or something a little different. It is like there's like a bloopiness, like a little bit of a radar ping kind of to it. But I just think the laser blast is a little bit wrong. And sort of takes you into the wrong. It's wrong for like the mood of the poem. I think there's a better way to describe that, would work better. Let's see. Yeah, let me look at the other. Yeah, and Kimberly Gibson Trent too points out we don't need the longings and the losses. And that's the entire thing I was talking about, that voice of like looking back and sort of summarizing. Like, I think it worked in the very beginning as the opening of the poem. It was a great year for ice, a cold year, Spartan and snowless. Like, great descriptions. We're like looking back. But then what we want to do is just, boom, leap into the present of that past moment. And I think that'll make the poem come alive. And I guess that's all I have to say. So let's just close with that, because I think it's a really close, wonderful, some great lines. Thinking about the marriage through the metaphor of this ice is really nice. We get to really feel it. We get to experience the ice on a visceral level. And it's something that even, having me grown up there, it's something I haven't experienced since I was 10 years old, out there in those Finger Lake kind of areas. And Western New York, and it takes me back, but either way, it's descriptive and really interesting. So I like that a lot. It's just a matter of getting immediate and direct. As far as the line breaks and the shape and the pace of the poem, I think that's really well done. There was nothing that like stood out as like annoying or clunky or confusing. So the voice is really there telling the story. Just a matter of shifting gears a little bit within the voice. Over on, let's see. Okay, I think we're going to move on. Yeah, okay, let's take a look at the other poem. And this was the trickier one. Oh, yeah, and the title. So we have maybe a lead-in title that was a great year for ice. I think that works. Another thing to do, you might want to, when you do the rewrite, what I like to do for titles, I like to title it probably like 80% of the time I do it this way, including the poem I just wrote this morning for the prompt lines this week. I was writing and sort of, you get to the end and you kind of like, you just see what pops into your head. and that's really what you were talking about. And you didn't know, and so there's a way that you can, especially with it's how haiku function in Haibun, you write your prose for the Haibun, and then somehow like that Luwat story of his mother, he's writing this. If you look back at the interview with Luwat or that Rattlecast, there's a way that he wrote that prose section for that great poem, that great Haibun, where he was talking about finding the fossil of this ancient fish, and where the scales were and the current lineation, all that like scientific stuff. He was just describing one of the highlights of his scientific career. And then all of a sudden that haiku about his mother's death popped into his head. And if you read the poem, and you get through, even just reading out loud, just read the thing out loud, let yourself sit with that last line for just a second and see what pops in your head. And sometimes that can be the title. It can make a great title too. So that's something I would suggest to play with a little bit as you work. Okay, now this is the strange sonnet that Rachel sent in. And it is very few words, interesting looking poem. So let's take a look at this one. It's called The Marriage Feast of the Witch and the Alchemist, a minimalist sonnet. So I don't know, a lot of years, we had a whole sonnet issue. I've never seen a sonnet this minimalist or something called minimalist sonnet. And so that's really fun. So here we go. The Marriage Feast of the Witch and the Alchemist, a minimalist sonnet. Culinary cookbook, ossuary, bone shook, incantation, set a hex, adoration, XXX, larynx, voice box, phalanx, hard knocks, liberate, long wait. Well, this is interesting. I do think, marriage. The marriage feast. So the nice thing about this is we get a lot of detail. We were talking in the last poem just now about how the title can add to things, add to the story, the narrative that you don't want to get in the poem. It would be a different voice. It's a perfect use of the title to sort of set the stage here for this. What's an ossuary? I've used that. We've used that word in Poems and Rattle before, but I had to look it up every time. It's some kind of religious thing. Right? An ossuary is a place or receptacle for the bones of the dead, often used when burial space is limited or when large numbers of people die in a short period of time. Okay. So thanks for letting me refresh my memory there. Culinary cookbook. And one thing I'm not understanding at the moment, and maybe reading it through a second time I'll understand, but why some of the lines are in italics and some are not. To me, it feels like a call and response type thing, like two people are talking. And I assume that's the witch and the alchemist going back and forth. And it's interesting. It shifts here. So we get hard knocks, liberate, long wait. So culinary cookbook. So the witch is saying culinary and the alchemist is saying cookbook. Ossuary, bone shook. Incantation, set a hex. Adoration, XXX. Larynx, voice box. Phalanx, hard knocks, liberate, long wait. I don't know. It's interesting. Let's see. Yeah, Jamie Thomas says, I'm a sucker for witchy references, and I love how bold it is. Kimberly Gibson Trent says, I would just call it a sonnet, not a minimalist sonnet. Let's see. Well, Morgan Finney says, I mean, conceptually, I love the idea of a minimalist sonnet, but I don't see how this is a sonnet still. I think so. I think it's, it's 14 lines. It has it's a Shakespearean sonnet in the rhyme scheme, because it's, lines, it's A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, and we go down there. And so it works that way. The one thing I love the concept of it, but to me, I'm wishing like more of this love story. I'm a little bit confused about the details of what some of the lines mean, I guess is the problem. So culinary cookbook, I like that. Ossuary, bone shook. I'm sort of on board there. Incantation. But then why is the alchemist setting a hex? Adoration in the XXX of those kisses? Or X's nose hugs. Which one? I guess those are hugs. But anyway, adoration, XXX. Larynx, voice box. So I don't know why. So I get a little lost. And larynx voice box. That feels like we're going back to culinary cookbook, like two ways of describing the same thing. Phalanx, hard knocks. Liberate, long wait. Yeah. Yeah, there's just something I just don't quite understand. Yeah. Yeah. And so it does too. I mean, the sonnet, the idea of a sonnet is 14 lines and then a volta, really. And I think that's the key element in the same way, like different forms have certain elements that sort of cluster around. They can come and go. The rhyme scheme isn't necessary to have that specific rhyme scheme. Of course, there's American sonnets that have no rhyme, but always sonnets, and you can vary the 14 lines. Sometimes there's 13-line sonnets and things like that too. But the idea is that you have about this length, and then you have a turn somewhere. And so part of the thing is I just don't understand quite enough about the turn. Rachel Greaves says the witch isn't the italics. Well, so one of the things, Rachel, is I would suggest switching the Marriage Feast of the Alchemist and the Witch, because I think to me I would assume that it's in the same order, their order of appearance in the title, and that's why I assumed it was the other way around. Centerfees, it's really intriguing. I just want a little bit more. Yeah, I mean, you gotta have. I love the concept, but have more of the story needs to come out somehow. And I just don't know. I feel like on the cusp of understanding what's actually going on, but I just don't quite get the story. The larynx and the voice box maybe is the hinge that, like, why are we going to that? I don't know. It just leaves me a little bit too confused. I think we just need a little bit more. I love the concept. I, again, keep playing with this. But I think Terry Miller says in Dungeons & Dragons, alchemists can set hexes. But there was the witch saying to the alchemist, set a hex. PMB says this, and I'm glad you said this because I thought the same thing. He says set a hex, just be hex or set hex. Yeah, there's a shift in the diction when we add, and so it becomes, that's one of the things that's confusing. Like we're listing things, but then here it's like a, like whoever's saying this side is telling the other person maybe to set a hex, and it's just a different structure. I'm not sure why either. And I don't know why it wouldn't just say incantation hex. And it feels a little bit like it's, one of these things does not belong. That's the line that's more like a full sentence where the rest are lists, and I'm not sure why that is. Yeah. Terry Miller says these are types of hexes, perhaps select one. Well, interesting. Yeah, so I love the concept. I want a little bit more of the story. It didn't get quite enough. What's happening with the voice box, the phalanx. It's going to be tough to get a whole story into, just a few words. It's 14 lines, an average of like 2 words per line or less. So it's like 24 words maybe, or 20 words to get a whole story, and there's going to be tough. But if you can fit the whole story in a way that makes sense, I think it'll be a really cool poem. Okay. Well, we're going to move on to, thanks for sharing these. Again, that was Rachel Greaves. Some really fun, interesting poems. Great selections, too. I love that you sent stuff that you're playing with and sort of pushing boundaries. I think they're great examples of poems to be talking about. So thanks for doing that, Rachel. And that was Rachel Greaves from Madison, Wisconsin. All right, let's take a look at, we're going to go back to the oldest poems in the queue now. And the last is December 20th, Victoria Kemp. Okay, and we have 2 poems here. Any general questions? No general questions. The first is this. So again, this is Victoria Kemp from New York. Dog River Elegy. We'll take a look. Dog River Elegy. At 26, I was chasing beers, boys, and leaving bars before the brawls started at 3 a.m. At 26, you were drinking beers, raising a boy, leaving doctors' offices with pain unsolved. At 28, I was moving to New York City to start over again, knowing that flights are expensive, come home at Christmas time, send a text, call twice. At 28, you were holding a newborn girl, being pumped full of chemo and emptying out the bank. Carted off to Mexico, prayer groups in flush, prognosis is purgatory. At 17, a bet we both felt about the same. At 17, it was only summer rain, muggy and hazy, passing over Mobile Bay, where young love... Sorry, this is a little bit too... There we go. I lost tracks. Mobile Bay, where young love is all that matters because we live forever and mosquitoes bite like sneaky kisses nipping at our legs and sweet kisses on lash lines. Presently, I am not sold on religion, but golden-haired lover boys with wide-toothed grins always knowing how to pick up a guitar and play on key. Presently, must be inspiring the sunsets to still produce pink muggy haze-fueled rain nightly, and old hounds to stay loyal and cool under the porch of a falling-apart house, and kissing new lovers without fear of heartbreak or heart-hate, and drinking with your friends at night too late and being late to everything the next day, and belly aches from laughing about how bad it was yesterday, and tears that run like Dog River. Oh, the tears. Yeah, so Terry Miller's past continuous tense is problematic in poetry, I've been advised. Yeah. Yeah, as Lynn Schilling says, my mind is wandering. Yeah, I'm a little... So Dog River Elegy, I like the idea here of in tears that run like Dog River. I think there's some real power in that line. And I think that's the author recognized that when he made that the title of the poem, Dog River Elegy. But I'm a little lost at the progression of time too, because we go from 26, we have two 26s, then two 28s, then two 17s, then the present. So I'm not sure what order we're going in. Yeah. Christina Knuven says, I was intrigued at the relationship between the two, but I'm not sure I ever saw the payoff. So at 26, I was chasing beers, boys, and leaving bars before the brawls started. A little too many B's in this, too. A little bit too much alliteration. It starts to feel a little, in the same way rhyming poem can be sing-songy. If you have too much alliteration, it's beers, boys, bars, before brawls. That's like one or two too many for the alliteration in one sentence. So pull back on that, I'd say. At 26, you were drinking beers, raising a boy, leaving doctor's offices with pain unsolved. So let me go 2 years ahead. At 28, I was moving to New York City to start over again, knowing that flights are expensive. I don't come home at Christmas time. Send a text, call twice. At 28, you were holding a newborn girl, being pumped full of chemo and emptying out the bank, carted off to Mexico, prayer groups and flush, prognosis is purgatory. So we have this parallel between the two people. But as some people are saying, Mary Keating says, who is me and who is you? You know, it feels like you're withholding that answer of who the you is. Like I'm thinking maybe it was, it's my mother, possibly, and that's the comparison. But without that knowledge, and we never really get to understand who the you is, we don't get to really connect with it. And so I think knowing who that is one of the first things we need to understand. And I just don't. Reading the poem, like who's holding the newborn girl? Is the newborn girl me then, if that's my mom, which is one thing I was wondering, but maybe not. I don't know. But then I don't know why we go back to at 17. I bet we both felt the same. At 17, it was only summer rain, muggy and hazy, pressing over Mobile Bay, where the young love is all that matters because we live forever. And it's getting a little bit, long and a little dull at this section. Like the real heart of the poem is this comparison between the you and the me. Yeah. Okay, so presently, I'm not sold on religion, but long-haired lover boys with wide-toothed grins always knowing how to pick up a guitar and play on key. Presently, and two, I think the gimmick of having this, the repetition of the different times gets a little tiring just to read. And so maybe, once you start out doing a couple times, maybe break free from that. I think there's a sense of wanting to do that, where we both felt the same. But I think maybe at 17, I bet we both felt the same, and then drop that act, I'd say, and move into where the poem really wants to go. Yeah. And then too, with the long prose, we want to understand this relationship and then get to the heart of it and actually see some of it that's going on. So the you presently must be inspiring the sunsets to still produce pink, muggy, haze-fueled rain nightly, and old hounds to stay loyal and cool under the porch of a falling apart house, and kissing new lovers without fear of heartbreak or heart hate, and drinking with your friends. I don't know. I just get lost. Yeah, Jamie Papa says, what age is presently? Doug Van Hooser says, I think maybe start at 17 and go forward, or start at the present and then reflect where the two characters have been. Yeah. So I think, again, I think so often we say this, but tell the story. Just tell us the story. We want to hear what you're actually writing about. And having it be obscured by sort of structures that you've set up ahead of time doesn't serve, it's not in the poem's interest or our interest, or doesn't make it interesting for readers. And so, Kimberly Gibson Trent says this poem needs rhythm and musical line work, even in prose poem paragraphs. Jamie Thomas says this feels like it wanted to go somewhere, but then sort of fizzled into melodrama. But the last line is still really solid. And so the last line, I mean, and tears run like the dog river. I love that line. And you really get to, there's something there. Maybe that's the start of the poem. If you were going to say, in tears that run like dog river, like what would the next thing that you would say be if that was the sentence? Like think about the voice that would say that, and then how would they keep going? Like what would come next? And I think maybe write the poem from there. And again, tell the story, let us in. Don't obscure it. Let's take a look at the other poem here. March Magnolia Blooms. Take a sip of coffee. And Terry Miller says too, and this is a good point, because one of the things, and maybe we should go back and look at the poem again, because one of the things Terry says, I struggle when I write prose poetry. It sounds like I, or you. And one of the things that makes this poem feel a little tedious to read with the structure is the way that there's always these declarative sentences that have the same sort of length and structure. They don't vary in that. I think when I think it was Kimberly Gibson Trent was talking about that needs more music. A lot of that is changing up the rhythms and mixing in. You have short lines and longer lines and mixing in the feel and having a sense of where to put that. And there's a sense that Terry Miller was getting at of like listing out things that happen rather than being immersed in the story. And I think those are two things to note. You want to vary, So even this section, must be inspiring the sunsets to still produce pink, muggy, haze-fueled rain nightly, and old hounds to stay loyal and cool under the porch of a falling apart house, and kissing new lovers without fear of heartbreak or heart hate. Do you see how those lines all take about the same amount of time to say? Like there's not a lot of variation in the way that the sentences are structured. Whereas if you look at a poet, and I think the best poet, one of my favorite all-time poets is Alan Shapiro. And one of the reasons he's my favorite poet, or one of my favorite poets, is how much wonderful variety he has in his sentence structure, and just the way that his sentences move on the page. Let me look up a random Alan Shapiro poem really quick from like the Poetry Foundation. And you just see, if I just pick a random poem, you will see this wonderful variety in the length of the sentences. And that's when we have an ear for poetry, that's the kind of music that we hear. Let's take a look maybe at... let's see. I'm trying to find a shorter one because it's easier to see in a shorter poem. Let's do gas station restroom. Here, really quick. I'm just going to read this poem. It's relatively short, and listen to the way that the sentences vary. Here, Gas station restroom. The present tense is the body's past tense here. Hence the ghost sludge of hands on the now gray strip of towel hanging limp from the jam dispenser. Hence the mirror squinting through grime at grime, and the worn to silver of soiled soap in the soiled sink. The streaked bowl, the sticky toilet seat, air claustral with stink. See the different places you pause. I mean, even though we have technically several longer sentences, we have these semicolons breaking them up and dashes breaking them up in different places. And so you have this variation of length. The streaked bowl, the sticky toilet seat, air claustral with stink, all residues and traces of the ancestral spirit of the body free of spirit. Hence, behind the station in the back end of the store, hidden away and dimly lit, this cramped and solitary carnival of inversion, Paul becoming Saul, becoming sense, anonymous, and animal. Hence, maybe this is a bad example because it's a very run-on sentence kind of poem. But find variety of structure and verbs and the way sentences are used, and that's really so much of what we mean when we hear the music of poetry and the music of speech. And you don't want to have the same sort of length and the same structure over and over and over again, because that is what kind of gets tedious. Okay, now let's look at the other poem. March Magnolia Blooms. Green eyes pierce through the thin wall I left behind, the walls were always so thin in our house. If you asked, I'd scrub my skin until it's raw, purify the false perceptions you placed on me, and try to remove all of me to make me more of you. If you asked, I'd break my bones to feel your pain, femurs and collars and hips and eye sockets wearing casts like heart-shaped lockets. And I'd try again and again, serpent grin. Listen, baby, you'll never know how to love men of tolerance. 10 days reminiscence and repeat premonitions. I miss that magnolia tree. 10 days, fists for bookends. Premonitions turn police visits. 10 days, police escort walks and lowered eyes. Focus on that magnolia tree just outside. Magnolias started blooming more towards summertime. There are no men of tolerance, just those thin walls left behind. Yeah. So this one, I really like the movement in this poem. I like the way that, a lot of times we talk about the touchstone and how you want to have something that you can like hold on to and help you know the place that you are situated within the poem. In this one, we have coming back to the magnolia. March Magnolia Blooms at the title, and then we come back to that often, and it allows us to move in sort of leaps and tell the story in kind of fragments that I think work really well. So that's the best aspect of this poem, I think. Let's read it again more slowly. March Magnolia Blooms. Green eyes pierce through the thin wall I left behind. The walls were always so thin in our house. And I think maybe somebody said, Desi Cochrane says, a little too melodramatic for me at the start. And I think this, this line, the aside here, I would cut. It's sort of... it's just not trusting, I think, that the drama of the story will play itself out. So we have this, it's a tell, not show kind of moment. And I would just cut that. Although Paul Buckner says maybe cut the first line and start with a parenthetical. But green eyes pierce through the thin wall I left behind. And maybe it's the contrast between the two, that we have this aside and the separate voice. And maybe you're right. Maybe it is a good suggestion to cut the first line instead and just start without being in parentheses. The walls were always so thin in our house. If you asked, I'd scrub my skin until it's raw, purify the false perceptions you placed on me. I don't know who the you is, and I feel kind of detached at this point. You placed on me, and you try to remove all of me to make me more of you. So without knowing who the you is, this feels kind of empty. But then, if you asked, I'd break my bones to feel your pain, femurs and collars and hips and eye sockets wearing casts like heart-shaped lockets, and I'd try again and again. Serpent grin, listen, baby, you'll never know how to leave men of tolerance. See, I like how that just sits there, that voice. That's one of those leaps that I think works really nice. 10 days, reminiscent and repeat premonitions. I miss the magnolia tree. This is where we get back to that referencing the magnolia tree, which works. Yeah. 10 days, fists for bookends, premonitions turn police visits. So the fists for bookends and what the 10 days are. Again, I think we're not getting the story enough to connect with it, but it comes in these fragments that are still interesting. There are 10 days, police escort walks and lowered eyes focus on that magnolia tree just outside. Outside of what? Magnolia trees start blooming more towards summertime. There are no men of tolerance, just those thin walls left behind. PMB says that "Listen, baby" would be a great opening line. That would. Yeah. I think both these poems are just not telling us enough of the story that we get to connect with it. And so, again, yeah, as Mark Grenier says, clearly an abusive relationship being described, I'm not sure what the takeaway is. Yeah. Without knowing any context, it's really hard to connect on an emotional level, even though we see these glimmers. Rose Leonard says that this is about domestic abuse. And what's the significance of 10 days? Terry Miller says another poem with great potential. And it is. Like, both these poems have a real heart to them that you can feel. With that last, that Dog River line, you can feel real meaning and emotion in that line. But we need to know more of the story. And it can be, describe some in the title. But we just need more sense of that. There's this way that people hold back and have distance from telling the actual story, thinking that makes it more poetic or that it'll be more universal if we don't get into the details. But we really want to know the situation. When you introduce a you, we want to know who that you is and what the relationship is to the speaker. Rose Leonard says, I thought the naming of the broken bones was powerful. Yeah. Tambarla says, I get a vision of a hanging tree here. That's interesting. Dr. Q says, scrub my skin raw until raw sounds like sexual abuse. Jenny Middleton said it sounded to me like a prison stay. So we have a lot of guesses going on. And I think, the trick is to get more of the story out so that we can feel and hear the story too. But there's both a lot of potential in both these poems. They're real heart and a sense of something going on here. But it's too occluded. It's too hold back at a distance for us to really connect. A lot of great, the Serpent Grin, Listen Baby, what if the poem was called Serpent Grin? And then it starts, Listen Baby, you'll never know how to love men of tolerance. And then we push on from there. And where does the poem go at that point? Yeah. Holly York says, I don't see abuse, more like desire to sacrifice. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, so that's the suggestion. I think just not enough of the story is told for either of these. Like, let yourself free. Let us in on your stories. Okay, we're going to move on to another poem. Once again, that was Victoria Kemp from New York. Zachary May, interesting question, says, is the 10 days because that's how long magnolias bloom before the petals fall? That's an interesting thought. I don't know. A clear connection with the other parts of the poem would be good, if so. Okay. Okay, now we have Sean Smith from Dover, Florida. He's got 2 poems for us. Any general questions? What can I do to enhance my poetry? Well, that's a good general question. Here we go. To my title, My Love Knows No Bounds. And just one small note, I wouldn't put title there. That sort of implies that title is part of the title, which is an interesting sort of metaphorical or meta-poetic idea to do if you were doing a series of poems. But it does make you wonder, and it makes you think about things, and I think it just means that's the title. But just say the title. Just say My Love Knows No Bounds, couple spaces, we'll know it's the title. My Love Knows No Bounds. What is it like for you? Because for me, it feels like we're worlds apart. Each day, the distance between us grows. I reach out for you, and I'm left drifting, drifting away in the vastness of my heart. In the void, I only see you. 10,000 exploding stars couldn't match the brightness of your smile. No pageant winner, nor trophy wife could match her beauty. My love for you knows no bounds. Through the heavens and space and beyond, my love travels. For my love for you is passionate and everlasting. Yeah, as Doug Van Hooser says, a lot of cliches in this one. The worlds apart is a cliche. The distance between us grows. The vastness of my heart. The brightness of your smile. Danette Burnmia says needs more images. Yeah, so what we want to do again is have, the connection, the emotional resonance of things, the things that makes us want to read poetry are the specific details. And the problem here, that the sentiment we can all understand and we can all sort of relate to, but poetry isn't about relating to something. It's about actually feeling and experiencing something in the moment. And you do that by being very specific, by making new metaphors, new images, new symbols to talk about the things that we're talking about, and have a lot of very specific details. The more specificity that you have, the more it's easy to lose myself in the voice of the poem and then feel the feelings of the poet. And when we have this way of talking in generalities from a distance that doesn't tell the specific story, that doesn't have specific images and details, you end up just having a thing that's not connecting. It's like a generalized, description of the thing rather than an actual direct experience. And so Morgan Fee says here, could be fine as a personal poem shared to a lover, not shared a general poem for public consumption. And that's one distinction I've been making for a long time, is that public versus private poetry. If you want to write a private poem and give to somebody to show them how you feel, that's great because they know your relationship. They have all those special, specific details that make a poem come to life just in the story, in the backstory that they already know. And so it can mean something on a really personal level, but to a reader who knows nothing, it's just so vague and distant that we don't connect to it. It's like a dictionary definition of a certain feeling, kind of, instead of the direct experience of the feeling itself. So, so think about the specifics of, what makes this person different than other people. Like, what can you describe? What happened in the relationship? Just the more specific you can be, the more we will connect, which is a little bit at first glance counterintuitive, because you think that the more general I can be, the more everybody can relate to it, but that's just not the direction that poetry operates on. Okay, let me take a look at the other poem next. See if it has. We like to have two, because then you see if it's got the same things going on. This is Lonely on My Best Days. I know, yes, I'm sure, don't worry, I'll be fine. Of course, that's what I'll say more often than not. It's just me anyways. What's there to worry about? Who cares anyway? Yeah, I know you do. But so what? I'm alone anyways. Yes, I know you're here. Clearly you don't understand. I never expected you to anyway. Fuck off. I don't want to be bothered. What is it with you people? It's always I'm here for you, this, and I care about you, that. Yes, I know you love me. What of it? Like, just leave me alone already. None of you knows what it feels like to be here, always being yelled at, constantly hearing that you're not good enough, being helplessly pushed around all the time. I hear your voices all the time, yet it's so empty in here. It's just a reminder that I'm always lonely even on my best days. Yeah, so again, just the same thing as Danette Burnmia says, it needs just more solid imagery. It needs more of the storytelling. And I think one of the things you could do, if it's going to have a poem in dialogue like this, it helps, like we already saw, conveniently enough, with Rachel Grieve's poem, where we had the alchemist and the witch, and one was italicized and the other wasn't. It feels like this is dialogue, but you lose track of sort of which voice is saying what. And so if you italicize one half of the conversation, then we would sort of not lose track of that. So that's one thing. But then what we need, detail. Just detail, because that's what allows us to access the poem. Yeah. And so, Yeah. And I think you can make poems in dialogue that work really well. It's definitely possible, but you still need to use a lot of poem, the poetic devices and elements. And there's a reason why. It's not like, it's not like there's sort of rules that you learn and are prescribed like PEMDAS in math, that the parentheses go first and then the, and then the exponent or whatever like that. It's not some arbitrary language that we agree on. It's actually things that work in poetry. Those poetic devices are things that work on human beings to make them experience on a visceral and direct level what you're saying. And using images, using details is what actually works. So put in those details, tell the actual story, let us know what's going on, and that's the first step, to make it very specific. Specificity is the key. Okay, let's move on. But thanks again for sharing that. That was Sean Smith from Florida. Yeah. Let's see. PMB says, I recommend listening to Joni Mitchell's album Blue on repeat for an entire day. Nice. I like that. Okay, this is Larry Cavaney. He sends stuff in frequently, so maybe we'll be quick about it. But how's the speaking to audience on this one? Okay, and it starts out, by the way, Tim. So I don't know. We'll see what he's got. By the way, Tim. Okay, the Flash can circle the Earth twice in 3 minutes, can vibrate through walls. But Tim, the Flash can't keep a girlfriend, can't be trusted with other secrets, can't keep up with the smaller details. But oh, Tim, the Flash can help stop crimes, can show a flashy side, fashion, can show up in time. Hey, Tim, check it. But Flash can't hold a punch, can't stay away from lost women, can't leave well enough alone. Well, I don't understand what the title is. Is the title The Flash? I'm a little confused about the structure. I do like the way that the poem moves, though. Each line, one of the things that poetry, a lot of poems don't do is have each line should in some way be progressing the poem. It feels like it's not empty if you're moving forward. And I think in this, as short as the lines are, we do have a real sense of movement here. The Flash can circle the Earth twice in 3 minutes. I like those details. Can vibrate through walls. But Tim, the Flash can't keep a girlfriend. There's something funny about that voice too, that I kind of like. Can't be trusted with other secrets. Can't keep up with the smaller details. But oh, Tim, it's strange. I don't know if he's talking to me. He might be, but maybe not. But oh, Tim, the Flash can't help stop crime. Can help stop crimes. Can show a flashy side in fashion. Can show up in time. Hey, Tim, check it. But Flash can't hold a punch. Can't stay away from lost women. Can't leave well enough alone. Yeah. So, yeah, Rahaf says it has a good sound, but I don't understand where it's going. Yeah, it had a sense that it was going somewhere at the beginning. I like the contrast in the lines of the can circle the Earth twice, the vibrate through walls, and then can't keep a girlfriend. There's that interesting start, but then it sort of doesn't go anywhere after that. And I don't understand the Tim is Danette Permia says, is Tim you? Tim or another random Tim? Yeah, I just don't know. So anyway, so it's an interesting start to a poem. Just push your poems farther, go surprising places, see where it takes you. And it sort of has one idea and then stays there forever. But interesting concept, says PMB. Yeah, I think so too. It's like a nugget, the starting nugget of a really interesting poem. But as Winston Munn says, kind of disappointing at the end. So where could that go? Like, push that poem, see where it can go. Okay, let's go next to David S. says, why can't he keep a girlfriend? I don't know. I mean, that's the thing that's interesting. There's an intrigue about that. Like, why can't the Flash keep a girlfriend? He's off flashing, but then he comes back so fast. I don't know. Okay, next up is Doug Van Hoser. Oh, Doug's here. I didn't realize. Yeah, Doug doesn't comment that much, but he's here right now. Good timing. And he's got 2 poems, no general questions. Doug is from Illinois. Raking Leaves is the first poem. And I think we'll finish off with these two. They look like pretty substantial, good poems, though, so sit tight, and we'll see what Doug's got for us. And they usually are. The truth is, when it's people who participate in the Critique of the Week, the poems are much better. It's just for several reasons, both a self-selection factor and because this is useful, and you get good advice all in around. Okay. Time Riley says Flash in the bedroom isn't good. No, definitely not. Okay, let's take a look at Doug's poems here. Raking Leaves. And right off the bat, I mean, it's a unassuming title, but it sets the stage a little bit. We're raking leaves, so we know where we are. So that's a nice aspect of that. Raking leaves. I try to remember faces that are now shadows. I am left with a hair color, a distorted smile, an attitude marinated in words that burst like a water balloon. That sweet lemon who offered herself every time we glanced against each other. Her limerence, Krakatoan. My desire, withered raisin. The first guy who fired me from a minimum wage job claiming change is good. So is chocolate ice cream, but it melts. The blue moon girl, it took me 6 beers to ask out. My birthday, she stood me up, but fate didn't care. 3 years later, she was diagnosed schizophrenic. I still see the square shoulders of the Vietnam vet whose poem of awful grace walloped Ruth Stone like a door slant. Disbelieving, she asked, "You jumped out of an airplane. You got shot while falling? And the final strike, did you kill anyone?" The possibility aghast her. Her incredulousness appalled me. His murmured answer, "That's a soldier's job. Too many wars later, it is still who wants to die, who wants to kill." He found words that told fear's bell, rang, survive. A vet whose M16 now was a typewriter, whose scars were images on the page enrolled in poetry boot camp with a flame-red-haired, naive, well-intentioned pedagogue whose poems I still cling to like an infant does a pacifier. A Google search does not resurrect him. Me, thankful but ashamed, I never shuffled to commands, attached my nylon and medical umbilical, fell from the sky, night jump. And then there's a note, Night Jump by James Files, Long Island Review, 2 winter 1973-74. So there's some wonderful lines in this poem. And as somebody pointed out, my favorite might be her limerence Krakatoan. I think that's a really fun poem. There's a great musical. There's really great lines. I'm a little... Yeah, Tom Barlow says my M16 was a typewriter. Nice. Paul Buckner loves the chocolate ice cream line. Yeah, that's great too. Kimberly Gibson Tran says, "Oh no, this poem is assigning homework at the end." Sharon Francis said, "This is pretty cool." Yeah. Yeah. Dick Westheimer, $1 to the Dick Westheimer, sorry, says $1 to the first to tell me what this is about. Great lines, good syntax. Yeah. Okay, let's try to figure this one out. That is my problem. The story about the vet, this is Sandra Fee, says the story about the vet seems to be at the core of this poem. And I like the core, and I like the music, and I like the really interesting lines. I mean, this is a great example of what we talk about so often and have for several of the poems recently, is that the details are what make the thing work. David S. says, "What is limerence?" Showing that David missed the Dion O'Reilly Rattlecast with her book Limerence that just came out a couple weeks ago. I didn't know what that word was either until Dion's book, but that means unrequited love, or an obsession with unrequited love, really. Like an obsession with somebody who doesn't love you back. And that was what her book was about. Intense infatuation is how Rose Lennard describes it. But I didn't know that word either until Dion. So check out that episode. Let's read this again and see if we can sort of make heads or tails of it, because there are great lines. Raking leaves. I try to remember faces that are now shadows. And so that prefaces the Vietnam vet that's going to be at the heart of this poem later. I am left with a hair color, a distorted smile, an attitude marinated in words that burst like a water balloon. I like that detail too. It's a good explanation or description for the way the things sort of come and go in your memory. They do burst like a water balloon. That sweet lemon who offered herself every time we glanced against each other. Her limerence Krakatoan. My desire withered raisin. The first guy who fired me from a minimum wage job claiming change is good. So is chocolate ice cream, but it melts. Yeah, I like the movie. I like the poem so far. The blue moon girl, it took me 6 beers to ask out. My birthday, she stood me up, but fate didn't care. 3 years later, she was diagnosed schizophrenic. I still see the square shoulders of the Vietnam vet. I'm not sure. I think 3 years later, she was diagnosed schizophrenic. I think that I would just move on and let it be part of a list that sort of we were not going into detail. I think it goes a little bit off the track where it would be nicer to just move into the main story faster. And I even wonder, I think maybe I'd cut her all together, or maybe cut it back even about stood up. Yeah, maybe I would just cut this whole stanza really, and jump from, we get so is chocolate ice cream, but it melts. The blue moon girl, it took me 6 beers to ask out. I still see the square shoulders of the Vietnam vet. Yeah, I think I would just cut that out. I think we're getting into this. We have this set up. There's a lot of examples. We're sort of listing people that we barely remember. And then we get into this square shoulders, and that's really the heart of the poem. And I think that's a good thing. So I would cut back a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, as Desi Cochrane puts it, and I guess I agree, the lines that call attention to themselves seem too pleased with their drama for me. Yeah, I think we just want to get through it a little quicker. Yeah, as Morgan Feeney said, I should have pointed this out too, because I had the same thought. Unclear to me whether Blue Moon Girl is referring to Blue Moon, second full moon of the month, or Blue Moon, the type of beer. And yeah, I was a little bit confused by that. But anyway, I still see the square shoulders of the Vietnam vet whose poem of awful grace. And what's the word awful mean? Awful. That's one of those words that I've seen and can never remember. Offal refers to internal organs and other edible parts of a butchered animal, also known as variety meats or organ meats. Interesting. Okay. The offal grace. Walloped Ruth Smith like a door, or Ruth Stone like a door slam. Disbelieving, she asked, "You jumped out of an airplane? You got shot at while falling? And the final strike, did you kill anyone?" The possibility aghast her. Is aghast the right word choice there? It feels a little bit off. Her I think somebody mentioned earlier that this should maybe just be incredulity. The incredulousness is I think you could technically conjugate it that way, but I think it's sort of wrong too. Her incredulity appalled me. His murmured answer, "That's a soldier's job. Too many wars later, is it still who wants to die, who wants to kill?" He found words that told fear's bell, rang, survive. And the rang survive feels a little off too. So interestingly, I think the poem, the heart of this poem is the story of the soldier, but that's where the writing feels a little more rough. And I think we can, polish it up in ways that make it a little bit more interesting. I think yeah. So, but then it picks up later. So a vet whose M16 was now a typewriter. I like that line. Whose scars were images on the page, enrolled in poetry boot camp with a flame red-haired, naive, well-intentioned pedagogue whose poems I still cling to like an infant does a pacifier. So I like the blunt, the quickness and the detail of that. But then this sentence is just way too long and clunky. We can get the idea of that much less. I think it's overly descriptive and just hard to read even. Whose scars were images on the page unrolled. On the... it could be whose scars enrolled in a poetry boot camp. We could skip all that. And then the flame red-haired, naive, well-intentioned pedagogue is just a huge clunky phrase. Like we could cut that down a lot to make it smoother. But then whose poems who I still cling to like an infant does a pacifier. That's nice. Now a Google search does not recommend him. Me thankful but ashamed I never shuffled to commands attached my nylon and medical umbilical I never shuffled to commands attached my nylon and metal umbilical fell from the sky night jump. and then that's a poem there from saying it's a line from that poem. I would just for how to handle this, I would not say all that detail. I would just say after Night Jump, Raking Leaves after Night Jump by James File up at the top as an epigram, and then just italicizing that. And if we want to find the poem, we can, but we nod to it. It does feel a little bit overly, overly referenced here in a way that's not necessary, I'd say. But the title of the poem and the poet would be nice, and all we need. All right, so I like the way this moves. So while Raking Leaves, I'm thinking of all this. I list all these things. I think maybe to me, we get to Night Jump, and I wonder if the poem's finished at this point. Like, do we want more? It feels to me like we haven't really got to the heart, the turn. We have this way that we're thinking back over time at these people that we barely remember. We're sort of listing some, really diving into this one person that at first we don't remember them quite, and then we get more details of the memory of the workshop with Ruth Stone. I think that's done really well. But then what does it mean? The question, the where do we turn next? It feels like the poem's not over yet for me. And I think it's a great start to the poem, and it might just be another 2 lines that finish it off. But maybe a turn back to Raking Leaves and getting back in the present is what we need, or I don't know, but it doesn't feel complete. It feels like we're sort of left hanging at the end. Yeah. Mark Greenwich says, I want to know if the vet is James Files. I'm pretty sure. The vet's James Files. His poem is Night Jump, which was published here, but he was talking about it in Ruth Stone. We get a line from that poem. That's the situation. Yeah. Let's see. Terry Mills says number 2 parts of the poem. I like the progression of the poem. I like the details, other than the stuff that we talked about before that would trim back a little bit. I like the progression of the poem completely. I feel like the ending's not there. Yeah, Rahaf S.A. says, it starts with remembrance, but towards the end, it's cut off. What happens? Does he remember something grand? Terry Miller says, great suggesting, Lynn Schilling. Where was that? I have to scroll up and find it. Where was Lynn? Oh, Lynn says, would While Raking Leaves work better? Yeah, Mark Greenwich says the leaves are memories, I think, so provides a good opportunity to return. Yeah, I wonder if it's just, a return to that. There's some kind of reflection. Like, why... there's a lot to think about for why people exist, like how people exist in these little fragments, and why certain fragments remain. There's a great poem that I love, that Peeling an Orange poem by Greg Kosmicki, and it's pretty long. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but look up that on rattle.com. It was the poem of the day not too long ago. I think I pulled it up out of the archives. But he remembers a coworker who peeled his orange in one loop all the way around and then hung it up afterward in his cubicle before throwing it away. And just the remembrance of that person was a great, well-told story. Let me actually, and I think we could even describe it and then see how he ended. Because here's the poem. It's Greg Kosmicki's When Peeling an Orange. And he starts out, it's 1:30 a.m. or so, and a little while ago I ate a banana. I got up from the kitchen table and dropped the peeling into the trash can, then ate an orange that I peeled all in a long continuous strip and dropped that in the trash too. The orange, like all oranges, was tart and burned my dry winter lips a little when I ate it. Whenever I peel an orange that way, I think of this guy I used to know at my job who was a nice guy. And so we go on talking about this guy at the job and how they were different. He was sort of a Republican and Greg is a liberal. He's diabetic and they're different, blah, blah, blah. He keeps going on. But then he goes back, I think this is how it ends. I think of him every time I peel an orange, whether I can get that one continuous strip going or not. No matter if I'm at home or work, peeling an orange for breakfast, or like tonight, alone in the kitchen, waiting out stuff, I think of him and wonder which of us was right, or if there is such a thing as right or wrong, whether he deserved to die if God was watching over him and me, and if he let me live on, to think of him now somehow, to keep him alive that way. Why at past we came to work together, and if I had been first to die, is there anything he would have remembered me by? And so there's that question. I guess that's what I want to get to. There's this question, is there anything he would have remembered me by? We don't ask that the whole time in the poem. And that becomes sort of the thing that we think about. There's always like this, because the truth is, your memory, I guess this is what I'm getting at. The truth is, memories aren't randomly occurring. They're coming up because your subconscious is trying to remind you of something and tell you something and teach you something so you can use in the future. That's how we work. And so in poems work that way too. These symbolic images pop up to us, they appear, and they're trying to tell us a story. And then the question is, what story are they trying to tell us? And why are these images and this memory coming up? And at the end, the reason why this poem really works for Greg Kosmicki is he realizes that what he's wondering about is what would this guy, if he had lived, what would he remember Greg for? And that's the thing that ties it together at the end and justifies the poem's existence. It gets to the heart of the question that was itching at him that he didn't even realize he was asking. And so that's what this poem is missing. This Raking Leaves is a wonderful poem, but it ends sort of before it gets to the deeper mystery that's being revealed by the memories themselves that are coming up. And so push just a little bit farther into the poem, and then we'll get that, and I think it'll feel really, it's a poem that'll be really memorable. And it's got great details, like Dick Westheimer said, great syntax, great use of everything. It's just a matter of pushing the poem a little bit farther into yourself and asking yourself, why am I writing about this poem in particular? Why are these people coming up when I'm raking leaves? And it might not be, hopefully it's not the same answer that Greg had, because then it doesn't make for a great poem. But there's some reason these are coming up. There's something deeper, and it hasn't been fully, it's an itch that hasn't been fully scratched yet. But it's a great poem, so it's just a poem in search of its own ending. Okay, let me look at the other poem. Again, we're looking at poems, and these are great poems by Doug Van Hooser, who's here today, so that's nice to see. Let's take a look at the other one. Uh-oh. We got to refresh this page. Hang on. We got to make sure we don't... Yeah, here we go. Boop, boop. There we go. Okay, the second is a shorter poem. And here we go. Again, this is Greg Van Hooser. Yeah. Doug Van Hooser, sorry. And the poem is, second poem, Using the Winning Poem as Bait. You put the bait on a hook, cast it into your lagoon. You think the wriggling worm is braggadocio. I think, but you are an audience of one, not a coliseum crowd that thumbs up or thumbs down. I am a 4-year-old reciting ABC Z to Z, looking for a smile, an exuberant good. A smitten teen wanting a kiss not on the cheek, but your lips are unbombed, no twinkle in your eye, no comment on the worm's peristaltic pace? I don't know that word. Undulating voice, its metaphorical ability to land a bite. Expectation puts me at the summit. Your response pushes me down the moguls. My balance teeters, my confidence totters, my skis cross, and I tumble, weed. Me thinking accomplishment is a big dipper, little dipper, an asterism in the poetry constellation you will point at and exclaim, I see it. But no, you point your dagger and tell me to walk the braggart plank. Interesting. So this is good. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, using the winning poem as bait. Yeah. Yeah, Hamet Malik likes this a lot. She says, great. Dry Montito says, I like it. Yeah, I like the general structure. I think there's some clunky, difficult places. Kimberly Gibson Tran says, ooh, I like tumbleweed as a verb. Morgan Feeney says, I'm not sure I understand it, but I do love it. And Wayne the Poet says, I felt the skiing, like that part. Some mixed metaphors, says Holly York. Yeah, I agree with all this stuff. I think, that it really came to life with the skis. Terry Miller says, haha, Ted Kooser said he became a poet to get girls. Yeah. And Jamie Thomas says, it's so cheeky and confident, but I don't trust whoever wrote this. Yeah, it's a fun poem in that way. Rahaf S.A. says, I feel like this is the type of poem that needs to be read twice. Well, let's read it again. Using the winning poem as bait. I think that's a fun title. It begs the question, what poem, what winning what, and where are we talking about? But still, I put the bait on a hook, and I mean, it begs the question in a good way. I'm curious because of that. Like, what winning poem are you talking about? I put the bait on a hook, cast it into your lagoon. You think the wriggling worm is braggadocio. So I really like the start to this. I think, but you are an audience of one, not a Coliseum crowd that thumbs up or thumbs down. I like the Coliseum crowd that thumbs up or thumbs down. The way it's structured with the I think first, it makes it difficult to read. And if maybe there's a comma here, so it's one continuous sentence, so the I think can be, I'm thinking that you think this is the way we're moving here. But with a period, it makes it a little bit difficult to say and follow. So I think, but you are an audience of one. So this is what we're thinking. And that just is clunky. But I do like the Coliseum crowd that thumbs up or thumbs down. I am a 4-year-old reciting ABC to Z, looking for a smile, an exuberant good. So I like that. And I think really the truth is, for so much, someone mentioned, it was Terry Miller said that Ted Kooser writes to get girls. I mean, we write to get so often just a little bit of praise. The truth is, when we were a kid, some teacher or a parent or somebody patted us on the back and said, "Oh, that was a wonderful thing you did writing that little poem," and we liked the feeling, so we kept doing it. We are in a way really simple creatures. We have a lot of layers of complexity too, but that little feeling of dopamine that we get when we're patted on the back because we did something that somebody else liked, that's why we all do this. And so talking about it is kind of fun because it's usually not this explicitly put. Yeah. Anyway, a smitten teen wanting a kiss not on the cheek, but your lips are unbombed, no twinkle in your eye. So this section to me, I like the where it's going with it, but the diction, the language itself is a little clunky and choppy in a way that makes it a little harder to read than it should be. Melody Bonilla says, I think it could drop looking for a smile, an exuberant good, and just push the surrounding lines together. Yeah, it slows down and gets a little clunky. Kimberly Gibson Tran says, I think the teen's cheek could have some acne on it. Yeah. PMB says, just all together, I would start with you are an audience of one, cut the first 2 lines. I think that would work too. I do like the hook and the cast and the bait though metaphor. Okay. Anyway, but your lips are unbombed, no twinkle in your eye. Terry Miller says, but not needed, and I agree too. You could just, a smitten teen wanting a kiss, not on the cheek. Your lips are unbombed, no twinkle in your eye. You don't need the but. No comment on the worms. I don't know that word. Peristaltic. What does peristaltic mean? I'm going to learn something today. Peristaltic. Is a roller pump, a type of positive displacement pump used for pumping a variety of fluids as a peristaltic. So it's like the systole and the peristole, I guess, and the heart beat. Okay. Peristaltic pace, undulating voice, its metaphorical ability to land a bite. Expectation puts me at the summit. Your response pushes me down the moguls. I think the poem really comes to life. We get a little bit it's sort of choppy and a little hard to follow just on a word by word level. But then once we're pushed down, puts me at the summit. Your response pushes me down the moguls. I like that. You can really feel that. My balance teeters, my confidence totters, my skis cross, and I tumbleweed. I think that's great. A great description of it too. Even with the mixed sort of scene or the setting for the metaphor is a little off. You don't have tumbleweeds on a mountain ski slope, but it's still, I like that verb. And I think the strangeness of it works too, actually. Me thinking accomplishment is a big dipper, a little dipper, an asterism in the poetry constellation you will point at and exclaim, I see it. But no, you point your dagger and tell me to walk the braggart plank. Yeah, so I love too the constellation part, the Big Dipper, the Little Dipper, and then the exclaiming, I see it. I'm not sure about you point your dagger at me and tell me to walk the braggart plank. It's just not as fresh as some of the other images and metaphors in the poem. I think maybe finding a better ending. But again, it's a really fun, a fun poem. Yeah. Terry Miller says no previous pirate reference. And yeah, that's kind of the thing, I guess, too. We have the option of sort of calling, what's the word? Like foreshadowing that with the boat. I mean, we're on a lagoon. There's a hook. It's cast out. We have that. So we could sort of make it feel a lot more tight and tidy by having that some kind of pirate reference ahead of time. Okay, so yeah, Steve Horse's last two lines don't work. Yeah, so I'm just I don't know. I think a little bit, some clunkiness here, and then I think work on the ending. Okay. But oh wow, it's 4:30, 4:29. We got to get going. Okay, so we're gonna wrap it up. But thanks; those are interesting poems, and thanks for being here, everybody. If you haven't yet, click the like button. We have a lot of people watching who haven't clicked like, although it's a good number of likes so far. We should say that. But thanks for sharing this, Doug Van Hooser. Good to have you here. We're going to be moving on now, but thanks for sharing them. Now, you mark that. Now, coming up on the Rattlecast this weekend, our guest is going to be... Oops, that's the wrong one. Right there. Now, note the special time. So we're going to be talking about the book Where Do You Live?, which is a book of epistolary poems between Jennifer Jean and Hannah Ahmad Jabir, and a Iraqi poet in Mosul. Jennifer Jean, who's been on the Rattlecast before, I think it was episode 76 maybe, she started this dialogue. She has a wonderful organization that she does doing poetry workshops in the Middle East, and struck up this dialogue with Hannah Ahmad Jabir. And we're also going to have Warat Kais, the translator, too. So these are both poems written in English, then translated into Arabic, and then the other way around as well. We're going to have both poets on, but because Hannah is in Mosul, that's really late at night at the regular time. So we moved it forward. 12 p.m. Eastern is the time to talk about this book. Where Do You Live? Should be a really fascinating dialogue and poetry. The prompt for this week was to... write a poem set in a garden you've only been to once before and include a metaphor. So that's your prompt for this week. A garden you've only been to once before and have a metaphor in the poem. That's going to be the prompt for this week. Now, also, I want to recommend everybody check out, if you haven't yet, the Poetry Space just released today, like it usually does. That's Katie Dozier's podcast that I co-host. That is this part 2 of our spiritual poetry episode featuring Chris Anderson, who's been on the Rattlecast twice, a wonderful Catholic deacon and poet. We talk about spiritual poetry, the idea that poetry, all poetry, as I feel, is spiritual. We talk about all that in a really fun podcast. Find that on the Poetry Space, anywhere you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, like that. Just type in the Poetry Space, you'll find that. Really great episode. And then tune into the Rattlecast on Sunday at that special time, though, noon Eastern, early morning on the West Coast, at 2 a.m., as some are saying, and in other time zones, 2 a.m. for Hemet. Sorry, Hemet. That's going to be a rough one. We don't blame you if you can't make it. But it is fun to get different times occasionally. If you're somebody who doesn't usually watch the Rattlecast or doesn't participate in the prompt lines, you get to be a part of it, too, and you can share your poems live. So join us this Sunday, and we'll see you then. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.